Hey, everybody. Welcome to ManTalk. This is Todd Hayen here and William Impey over on the other side there. And we're going to get going here with a little clip we've got to play and talk about. And you can get to my website below my name. And this is my email address. Oh, no, that's my website. Sorry. Let me see. Here's my email address here. And if anybody wants to get a hold of me for any reason to ask questions or to book a session or whatever you want to do, you can grab that. And William, what do you have to say here?
Yeah, likewise. There's me. There's my email. I think you have my website up there as well. I'm always out to hear feedback. So give me a shout.
Cool. Okay, so we're both practicing psychotherapists in Toronto, and if people are interested in that, let us know. Let me get this out of here.
Well, yeah, and speaking of controlled act, I'm a counselor.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. We can't even use the word, can we?
You can't.
Right. I know, that's crazy.
Which is fine with me, though, because I like to make a distinction because I actually do work that is different than psychotherapy. Quite that's different. Right. It's very similar in some ways. Yeah. But very different in other ways.
Right. Yeah. Sorry about that. And it makes no difference at all, or positive difference, because the label psychotherapist doesn't really mean that much. I mean, it does as far as, well, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't. So whatever.
Letters beside your name does not make you a competent healer.
That's true. Sad to say.
Yep.
Okay, I will play this clip and we will go from there.
One has to be very, very careful how we deal with each other. And that's one of the reasons why I hate psychology and analysts. They are a disease of our time. They should be all just put on an aeroplane and flown into an island, and they should, in the Pacific, they should analyze each other, but they should not bother us. Besides, these people, they just come like just boldly as if it was a profession or a science already, and they do not confess that their knowledge is not much more than, let's say, brain surgery during Middle Dynasty in Egypt during the Pharaoh time. So out with them, forget about them. They are disease. They are our disease, and that's exactly because they are too indiscreet.
No, for God's sake, I would be the last one who would ever allow it. I think it is one of the greatest stupidities and the greatest mistakes of the 20th century. There's something finally and definitively wrong about psychoanalysis. All my figures in my films are not really psychoanalysis. They are not captured with psychoanalysis. And I believe that explaining every dark little corner that we have in our soul is a very unhealthy and a very stupid and a very dangerous thing. We should not do that. Why? Because when you inhabit a house and you illuminate every last corner of the house with strong lights, the house becomes uninhabitable. And human beings illuminated to the very last corner of their darkest soul become inhuman and uninhabitable.
I can only laugh. I mean, there's a lot to be said here. William, why don't you tell our listeners who this guy is? Because I realized when I played the clip that it's just his name and it doesn't even explain who he is, and you probably could do that better than I could. Who is Herzog?
Yeah, Werner Herzog is I guess we would call it an American independent filmmaker because he moved to America from I think it's Germany. Yeah. You can look it up. And he's famous for making very quirky, very idiosyncratic documentaries. He also made some fictional films as well. But yeah, he's known for for just this, his kind of like intense, his intensity and his kind of brash irreverence. He made, there's an interesting, if you want to, like a good jumping off point for his work is to watch a film he made called Fitzcarraldo, about these this team of people that are trying to, I hope I'm not wrong with this, but I think it's about, they're trying to build an opera house in the middle of a jungle.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Even more interesting, his wife, I believe, made a documentary of the making of that film called Burden of Dreams, which is equally as interesting, if not more, about the struggle that he goes through to make the film. And it's very much like Apocalypse Now, Hearts of Darkness with the Coppolas. There's the film that got made, and then the making of the film that's even more interesting. So that will be a good starting place. Yeah, and the film that I think he's most well known for now is Grizzly Man.
Yeah, that's the one I know really well. Right,
exactly. Timothy Treadwell, who's kind of this lost soul who finds connection with grizzly bears, and then actually goes up to Alaska, and lives with them, cohabitates with them, learns about them, and then he also plays a kind of a bridger of worlds because he tries to educate kids about it. Anyway, it ends badly.
Yeah, I was going to say you're going to give a spoiler alert here as to how it ends. Yeah, and it's a very interesting.
The movie, you can tell by the trailer.
Yeah, right. Well, he goes into, which is interesting that he's commenting on psychoanalysis, because he does go into some pretty deep psychological issues with, at least in Grizzly Man, he certainly does, and exposes it. I mean, he doesn't analyze the guy, but he exposes the psychological issues that Grizzly Man was dealing with. Anyway, I thank you for that. And the first thing that I would say, and it's a question to you too, is, do you think he's including any kind of psychotherapy, any kind of counseling or whatever in his, because he uses the word psychoanalyst, and he comments on it as if he's talking only about psychoanalysis, but I have a feeling he's not. I mean, I have a feeling he's really talking about anything that would come under, because at one point he uses the word psychology. So what are your feelings with that? I mean, and he obviously has had a really bad experience with it, because he is like really angry about it. He's not just saying, "Oh, I don't know if that's a good idea." He's like saying they're evil. They should all be flown to some island somewhere and like practice their evil craft on one another. What kind of
meanwhile for the stroking his beard, going, interesting.
Yeah, right.
That you resist. Right. He's he's like this consummate trickster, right?
Yeah, of course.
A lot of great artists are in that way. Great magicians have that infantile quality of magicianhood, where they're very slippery, very tricky. You constantly look for them to be delighting in the contradictions that they sort of live in and revel in, and challenging you to try and provoke you to try and be jostled back and forth by these paradoxes that they throw at you, these riddles that they throw. So don't take anything that he does or says on face value, because he has this trickster thing. So yeah, of course, you can hear him conflate psychology and psychoanalysis, which are obviously two very different things. For those who don't know, psychology would be the scientific understanding of the human mind, and usually that's from a neurochemical perspective, right? Biosocial, also another one. And then psychoanalysis is a very different thing. That is based in Freud's concepts of the personal or the collective unconscious, and analyzing a person from that perspective is the kind of the beginning of what we call talk therapy. Psychology only included talk therapy a little bit later, but mostly it was pharmacological interventions, and also this, or I should say, psychiatry is the pharmacological intervention to try and deal with the pathology, but psychology itself is simply categorizing and mapping the experience in a way that can be worked with through the scientific purview. So his point, I think, is a deeply humanistic one. There's this kind of like, hey, don't demystify humanity. And I'm with him on this, in that I do see that there is a kind of violence in the demystification of the world. You know, and interestingly enough, this is also a guy who's gone and worked with, I think, non-contacted or like very limitedly contacted peoples, right? And there's this sense when you get into that territory of the human experience of this fucking incursion of the Western modern world. You know, I heard a terrifying story recently about how Starlink brings the internet to very limitedly contacted peoples in the jungle, and how instantly that half the men are addicted to pornography. It's like, Jesus fuck Christ. You know, of course. So I get him. I get it on that level, of course. But he's being funny. He's trying to get a rise out of people. He's doing it and not doing it. He says, you know, don't you diagnose me doing that as a disease? Huh?
Yeah. Well, you know, in this, from what I'm looking at too, go back to something you said right at the start. Now I can't remember what it was, so I won't comment on that. But it's, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. This demystification. I think there's an older. I think he's looking at an older paradigm of psychoanalysis, maybe a Freudian. I don't think he's really commenting accurately on, say, Jungian psychoanalysis. I think Jung was very, very much interested in maintaining the mystery, not illuminating every single crevice of the human mind, as he uses as a metaphor for the downside of psychoanalysis. Freud probably did that as well, but Freud was much more. He came more out of the medical model than Jung did. So,
and make it a science, and
Jung, he was very, and Jung was concerned about that as well. But I think if you look at Jung's Red Book, you can certainly see a lot of his belief in maintaining the mystery, maintaining that, and I think at least the way I practice, and I'm not a psychoanalyst, but the way that I practice my work from a depth Jungian perspective is illuminating only what is, how do I say this? Illuminating whatever it is that the client comes in and claims is a problem. If a client comes in and claims that he or she is having issues, say, with depression or anxiety, I mean, as long as it's not normal, natural depression or anxiety, because, you know, we live as human beings. Circumstantially, we're going to be depressed and anxious. You know, whatever. You know what? I talk for 25 minutes on that, but it's more of what is blocking that, what is causing what we would say would be an unconscious system that is operating, that is not in alignment with the person's intentions. And I'm probably not wording that really well. I would not. And maybe psychoanalysis is more like this, of illuminating everything. And I don't see it that way at all.
Possible.
Well, no, at first it's definitely not possible.
The depth of the human soul, the depth of the unconscious, it could never be fully illuminated by the light of awareness that we bring to it. Never. No. It's a joke to think that the things are true. He's not wrong in that there is a kind of violence in kind of ripping things open and putting them under the light. Which is interesting, which is exactly one of the critiques of science, right? Is that things look very different when they're like ripped open and put under hot lights and examined. It's a very unnatural way of being. But coming back to Werner, though, I mean, did you hear what he said in the first sentence? We have to be careful with each other.
Oh no, I didn't catch that. Yeah.
Allow me to psychoanalyze Werner Herzog. He'll fucking hate me for it. We have to be careful with each other. Who? You?
Yeah.
You want the world to be careful with you, because it feels to him to be psychoanalyzed is something that he can't tolerate. He can't listen.
You know, there was a comment. I don't know if you read it on the actual link, but
was there?
The YouTube.
I didn't.
Did you see that? It said please refrain from telling us or commenting on what you think is messed up in Herzog's, you know, like don't psychoanalyze him for these comments, because apparently tons of people did. I didn't read through any of them, but apparently people were like saying, well, it's pretty obvious what his problems are, you know. Because
the little trickster in him is a provocateur. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
He's provoking people to psychoanalyze him by the very fact that he says that he doesn't want to be psychoanalyzed, and that no one should. I mean, it's such a beautifully trickster move. And then he says also, because this is an interesting follow-up at the end, he says, because it's too indiscreet. He couches it in terms of like, you don't admit that you're like doing brain surgery in the Middle Ages or whatever, right? That it's a very young science, which is true. The arrogance of the scientific purview always kind of likes to pretend that these things like psychology are somehow written in stone. They've discovered some kind of universal truth, when really, of course, science progresses. For anyone who's interested in how human beings understand themselves in the world, read a book called by Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Paradigms, I think it's called. And basically and also I would suggest anyone to study the history and philosophy of science, because believe it or not, science has a history and there is philosophical presumptions behind it.
Oh, of course.
But you go into that and suddenly the whole world looks differently, because it's like, well, what do you mean? Like, during the pandemic, you get this like trust the science, and it's like there couldn't be a more unscientific attitude to take, to say trust the science. Science is never trust anything. Keep searching, keep digging. Of course. Anytime that you think you're right, wait for what Thomas Kuhn would call a paradigm shift, right? When I'm going to try and give you a basic idea here. It's very Hegelian. In the beginning, ideas are unthinkable. That the Earth would be round. No one could ever imagine the Earth is round, because who has the view to pull up to see that? It's only what I see before me, which appears to be relatively flat with But then as new information comes in, right, and then suddenly you get into a point where you can see that the world is round. Oh, now we have to incorporate that into the worldview, okay? And then we create a new one, and on we go in a kind of Hegelian cyclical thing. People still to this day operate unconsciously under the belief that, like, oh no, that's it, we hit it, we're done. We did it all. We understand everything now. Science kind of like cracked the code of everything. So to not believe in science is, well, you just don't believe in truth. But it's based on this false assumption. So this idea that he's trying to say, well, science, the problem that I have with it is that they're lying to you. They're not honest about the fact that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. I'm with him on that. But he's using that argument to it sounds to me like plead with his audience, and plead with the world to understand. It's like he's saying, I need you to know, without saying it directly, please don't psychoanalyze me, because I feel too fragile.
Well, yeah, that's his thing. What he's talking about himself and what he's presenting. I agree 100%. Yeah. I mean, going back to the science things, some of the things you said, I think are so right on, that he contradicts himself in his comments, because he is presenting a scientifically impossible task of illuminating everything in the psyche, and saying that's what's wrong with psychoanalysis, is that if it illuminates everything, which it will, he presents it as an assumption that's the reason why you want to stay away from it, because then you become inhuman. But the reality is that you can't do that. Just like science cannot know everything about everything. It is constantly an act of discovery. In fact, I've read somewhere, no idea where it was that the belief from this person that the universe is such that the more we know about it, the more complicated it will become, that it will always stay several steps ahead of us, and we see that in science. I mean, when they first discovered, a microscope and could look inside of a cell, then all of a sudden there were things in a cell that scientists never knew about. And then there's molecular science, and then there's atomic science. You just go on and on and on, and there's always something that has not been discovered yet. And he's putting psychoanalysis into a scientific paradigm, which is very, cause and effect, black and white, very objective, materialist. And it's, in criticizing it for not being science, like it's like at the same stage, brain surgery was in Egypt, which actually was probably pretty good. Okay. But at the same stage as that. So it's obviously nowhere near as clear and as scientific as it should be to make the claims that it makes. And that's the last thing psychoanalysis or psychotherapy wants to be, is this kind of black and white objective cause and effect binary thinking that you can figure out down to the very tiny part of the mind to be illuminated. And
he fears that, I think. He fears that he will disappear under the harsh lights of the scientific.
Oh yeah, he's definitely afraid of that. But he's describing something that's inaccurate.
Yeah,
that's
his
not.
Heart will, I should say too, by the way, because he's not really talking about himself. That's the speculation that I'm making. But I think even more closer to what he's saying, he's like, don't shine a psychoanalytic light on my work, because then it's going to evaporate. You're going to miss the point.
Okay, that's good. Well, you talk about his work or him?
His work, because I think that's the clip. I speculated that behind that is the terrified little boy who doesn't want to be psychoanalyzed, right? Through the movie. But on the front, I think what he's saying is like about not analyzing the film. I mean, I think obviously he's responding here, not obviously, but I assume he's responding to a question of like, oh, don't you see your film through this psychoanalytic lens? And that's when he snaps into "Don't you dare."
Yeah, you're right. I didn't catch that, but the fact that he makes some comment about the characters in his films are not a presentation of psychoanalysis or something to that effect. And that we don't know what that whole conference is about. We don't know what prompted him to go into his psychoanalyst critique in the first clip when he's young. And we don't know what the panel is about that caused him to go into that. So that's probably what it is. You're probably absolutely right that it's some kind of commentary on his work, and he's bringing in this idea that his work is being psychoanalyzed,
which I would agree with, right? I mean, if you've read Susan Sontag on Against Interpretation, even to a certain extent, if you go into like the French deconstructionist Roland Barthes, for example, The Pleasure of the Text, you can enjoy the kind of eroticism of a text without ever understanding. You can read a poem in a language you don't have any clue of, right? That you don't know at all, and just enjoy what it feels like to hear the sounds and to have the words in your mouth, right? And that can be enough. And I think that's very true. And I kind of believe in both. It's sort of like if I come out of a great film or if I come out of a great gallery show, there's a period where I just want to like savor what it is without needing to sort of take it apart. But then, once that fades, once that kind of initial contact, then I'm hungry to like go and be like, what's in this? I want to take this apart and look under the hood. But not always, because there's also some great pieces of work that I love that I'm like, I don't need to psychoanalyze or analyze that. I just
because you receive it through you're hitting on one. You're reminding me of one of my favorite stories when I was in Moscow a bunch of years ago.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to go to the Moscow Art Theater and watch The Cherry Orchard by Chekhov, and it was all in Russian, and I only knew like 3 words of Russian, and it was a weird experience because you sit through this amazing play with amazing actors and not understand a word they're saying, but getting something from that was really profound. And your senses just really paid attention to inflections and to the way things were said and the actors' movements and everything. And it was one of my favorite theater experiences I've ever had. I didn't understand a word they were saying. So that's just what you're saying here. It's like you take in something that isn't just analytical. It isn't just the words and the story. There's much more to it.
And you can marvel at it and be in appreciative consciousness and just delight in whatever it is. What I think Werner Herzog misses is that, sure, maybe for psychiatrists, psychologists, or traditional psychoanalysts, there's a coldness. But obviously in the kind of work that we do, I mean, I always like to begin with just a kind of appreciation. Like you listen to a person talk and you just say, oh, it's, I like how you put that, or I find it really interesting that, that you have this attitude. And not only is it a great way to let people know that it's okay for you to be you and that you're valued and appreciated, but it's like, I don't only see you as kind of fodder for analysis, because I think if you feel that way, it feels like it feels a little rough. It feels a little violent. It's kind of like sex with a foreplay.
Oh, sure.
Like, you know.
Yeah, sure. And again, we don't know what his experience was in order to come to these conclusions. He very well may have had an experience with a psychoanalyst that was very much like what you're saying there. And, you know, again, if you go back in history and you look at Freud and you look at the people he was training, you know, you do see a possibility. I mean, they were moving out of a very scientific medical model of psychiatry. And I think a lot of people, and I don't know how many people listening to this are like this, but I certainly was when I first got into this field. A lot of people believe that psychology or psychiatry or working with the mind or whatever started with people like Freud, and that method of it did. But there were psychiatrists way before Freud started doing his talk therapy work and his belief in the unconscious, who believed not at all that anything that Freud said. They did not believe that there was an unconscious. They believed any kind of mental illness, psychosis, insanity, whatever it was physiological, was it like neuroscience, was in the brain. And you either changed that or affected it or treated it through chemical analysis or through surgery or whatever. There was no sense at all that there was something going on in the psyche that was not material. And, you know, William James was probably one of the first that you know, started to bring all of this.
Major shift.
Major shift with William James. And he's basically forgotten now in the field. I mean, very, very few people refer to William James and his incredibly, you know, trailblazing work in this. I mean, more from a spiritual perspective, say, but, you know, Jung and Freud, Jung especially, I mean, certainly can be classified as spiritual therapist. Freud kind of shied against that. He wasn't. He didn't really want to be identified that way because he was in such competition with his professors and his, you know, his psychiatrists in the medical profession.
He was embattled, I think.
Oh yeah.
But if you go back even further, right? I mean, even the shift into the concept of the interior mind. I mean, this goes back to like St. Augustine's Confessions.
Oh, of course it does.
Right? Where he's where he's talking about this this relationship with himself.
Right.
Even to things like the concept of like reading aloud versus reading in your head. There was a period of time when the reading in your head, like people, it was like a magic trick or something. I don't even know if it's in that book. If it's in the Confessions, but anyway, you know, you could imagine that this point in history where, like, what's this guy doing? Oh, he's reading. Well, his mouth isn't moving. Oh no, he's reading internally. Like there was a point where that was a kind of like, what do you got to be kidding me? That's like such a bizarre thing, because people were so externalized in their worldview that the concept of having this, you know, interior life just didn't even make sense to them. It's kind of like if you look back at what, you know, like characters in Greek mythology and in Greek epics, you know, it's like they're not psychologized in the least, because their motivations are like, you know, which god that they're praying to, or, you know, and they're seen in a very different way, and not necessarily a better or worse way, just a totally different way.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of emphasis going way back, you know, Greek time certainly, and like dream work, and you know, a lot of things that were not really scientifically explored until Freud's time, or even slightly before him with you know, other trailblazers. But that, I think the idea of the unconscious, and certainly what the unconscious, I mean, maybe it wasn't defined the same way, goes as far back as myth does. You know, the idea of myth and stories that are, I mean, that's one of the main things that Jung certainly brought to it, was fairy tales and how they go across cultures, and they all have a similar meaning from human experience in the unconscious and in archetypes and whatever it might be.
Yeah, Werner Herzog, even maybe an even more famous film of his is a movie he did on the cave paintings in Lascaux.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And it's so obvious that he gravitates to these ideas about what it means to be human. And yet he can't stand this concept of psychoanalysis and these bright lights. He's like, the stupidity, and like it's wrong, it's morally wrong and stupid and violent to do this.
Well, I think there were a lot of people that felt that way. I think I was mentioning to you earlier when you first showed me this clip about Rainer Rilke, the poet, very well-known poet during that time, during the time of the beginning of psychoanalysis, that all of his friends were trying to get him to go through psychoanalysis, and he refused because he believed that he had to keep his demons or else he wouldn't be able to write good poetry.
And you agreed. Yeah, I'm curious to know. I didn't ask you earlier, but like, follow through on that. Like, how do you see that that's true?
Well, I think there's truth to that. I was talking to one of my professors at Pacifica, and I made some comment somewhere online or something about making the unconscious conscious, and he said, well, not all of it, was his response. And of course that's what I meant, but I wasn't really clear with what I was saying. And it's like you don't want to release those demons necessarily. And again, as an artist, I mean, because I spent most of my life writing music for my work, and I consider myself a composer artist. And when you look back in history and look at people like Bach and Beethoven, and especially Beethoven, you see very serious mental illness in a lot of these people. And it probably is true. If they release their demons through psychoanalysis, they would not create the same thing
they wrestle with, I think is what you mean, right?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, it's really hard to describe all that. And I'm not 100% on board with that idea. I do believe, on one hand, depending on what mood I'm in, I do believe that if you have serious mental issues that really diminish your life, diminish your your ability to be relational with other people, whatever it might be, I don't know if that really does directly affect your creativity. Well, I think
No, go ahead, you finish.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it might. I don't know.
I think that I think that the reason that this is kind of known entity, that like it's from these tortured minds of great art, because these people have something to wrestle with.
Yeah.
Give me someone who's totally at peace with themselves and like
right.
They might create beautifully aesthetically pleasing like work. Right? They might write a haiku that's incredibly beautiful and aesthetically pleasing. They might create something like that, but like the kind of the depth and complexity and kind of full catastrophe of like Shakespeare canon or whatever, or what like that, I think that comes from people wrestling with their pain. And any trauma survivor, to a certain extent, is kind of given this riddle, this journey to go on to try to understand and reconcile or come to peace with what the fuck that was. And some, especially intellectual and creative types, will try to like understand that to their detriment, in terms of healthy functioning, ego states. But from that struggling to understand, I think you get a great sort of wealth of art, which is always therapeutic. And it's funny that it's like, oh, well, when did we start this idea of psychotherapy? I mean, the minute you started making art. Because it's like, I got this thing in me that I need to get out so I can work through it and try to make some sense of it, and then have that sense of normalizing and validating my experience. Like when I make this image, or I make this, I turn this phrase, other humans go, oh, yeah. That's normalizing and validating my experience, which is the core of the healing aspect of the work. And so when did that start? I mean, probably started the minute people were grunting around a fire, right?
Well, what I would ask you then is, and this is a question I ask myself quite often.
Yeah.
Was Rilke right? Was he correct in avoiding psychoanalysis? Because if he was fully integrated, he wouldn't have anything to wrestle with. And therefore he would have no desire.
Who's fully integrated? Come on.
Well, okay, yes, who's fully illuminated, just like what Herzog says. Okay, that's true, but illuminated enough, conscious enough that he doesn't have anything radical to wrestle with. Therefore, he has no compulsion to create. no compulsion to put into abstract terms, which is what art is, what poetry is, what art music is, rather than go out and build a bridge or build an aqueduct or something. That's creative as well, but that is not an expression of the human condition the same way as a painting or as a piece of music, a symphony or something. It doesn't, huh?
You can't imagine that like anyone who has reached some level of enlightenment, you can't look at like Ramana Maharshi and imagine that he's going to write some tortured opus on the human condition. Do you think Neem Karoli Baba is going to get off his mat, dust himself off, and start hammering away at a typewriter to try and tell some tortured story of his existence?
No,
he's transcended that. He's gone beyond it. So
that's what I'm saying.
But the irony here is that people are like, oh my God, don't psychoanalyze me because God forbid I should instantly become enlightened and I'll have nothing to, I'll have no more drive. First of all, if you got enlightened, you wouldn't care about not producing the work because that's
exactly right. That's exactly right.
It's futile. But also the idea that somehow you're at risk of being completely illuminated. My sense is that there's a kind of a weird, it's almost like an arrogance in that. Like, would you really think that you're? No. On one hand, you're underestimating yourself because you're way more complicated than could ever be understood. On the other hand, you're overestimating the capacity of an analyst to get anywhere near fully understanding you to the point where there's nothing to wrestle with, right?
Well, yeah. I think too.
That anyone that, like, for example, a poet, a painter, a comedian that receives really good and effective psychotherapy or psychospiritual or emotional transformation, then won't be able to ever be funny. Look at Ron White. Ron White was a very successful comedian, right? Known for smoking cigars and drinking scotch on stage. Well, he was very successful. And then later on in his life, he had a bit of a kind of come to Jesus moment, went down to the jungle and drank some ayahuasca, has now returned to the comedy scene. Just as funny, if not funnier, but in a very different way. And he gave up cigars in the scotch, and now he's healthy and he's drinking fucking smoothies on stage.
I think that's what would happen because I believe that the expression of art is the expression of the human condition. And if the human condition is XYZ, then that's what the expression will be. If it's ABC, then it's a different expression. I mean, you think about all the artists that essentially claim that all of their inspiration came from God or came from Jesus. I mean, that was pretty much the mainstay back at certain times in history, that you weren't an artist unless you were depicting what you believe the divine was. And most of that art is, like you said earlier, is aesthetically pleasing. It's beautiful. It's whatever, unless you were painting something or creating something that was supposed to symbolize the torture of Jesus through the crucifixion or whatever, which of course was a major topic. But I think what you're saying is right on. I think that as long as there is suffering in the world, there will be art that represents that suffering. And there will also be art that represents the beauty and the divinity and the sacredness of human life and nature and whatever. I think there'll be both. So you can't really move the art around. I mean, certainly you go through certain periods, like in the Soviet era, bad music was considered like no, or bad art or paintings. It's like, no, you have to depict something that the party says is representative of the wonder of.
They still made great films though.
Huh?
They still make great films though.
Well, a lot of that was also done in a way to circumvent and to avoid, the rule of the law. They were smart, they were clever, and they could still present what it is they were presenting.
Limitations create the work, right? And this is why there's always such great work when you have to. It's always better indirect and cryptic, but like especially when you're trying to like avert censors and you play a game of cat and mouse,
right? The
censor where you can kind of say something and through innuendo. You think of like how you can slip in a political message in a Hollywood film. Right. And sort of like the audience sort of gets what you mean. And if you had put that on paper for approval, it would have been rejected. But it's almost better that it was sort of that it was served to the audience in this indirect way.
Well, you look at the work during the McCarthy era, the
Totally.
Red Scare, and so much of Hollywood was involved in communism, and was brought up on charges and whatever of being communist. And you look at the work of those people, and you see just what you're saying. There is this very subtle, very clever way to work in their ideology and the writing they did, and the characters they developed and whatnot. But of course, it went right over the heads of any of the people who were trying to prosecute.
Yeah. Goes over the heads of the new execs. Yeah, and there's great filmmakers in Iran, and they can dodge the censorship of the mullahs by these kind of winky great sort of cryptic films. I love it. I think art benefits from being, when you try to restrict it and gird it, it's almost like it galvanizes the sort of artistic welling up in the human condition, where it's like, oh yeah, you're going to try and stop me. Well, now I have something to push back against. It's like you put a hand up so that there's resistance to push. And with Werner Herzog in this whole thing too, I think part of why he says this stuff and why the audience gobbles it up is that there is this whole thing about he's subverting this bourgeois idea of polite society, right? And this is what I'm talking about with like repression. So you give people these kind of like, these are the taboos, and then trickster energy within us is going to absolutely delight. What the trickster in humanity feeds on is taboo. Tell me I'm not supposed to do it so that I can do it, right? Because the minute that you take that away, I got nothing to rebel against. There's nothing there for me to really dig into. So if you pull back even further with Werner Herzog, it's kind of like he's just allowing us to watch him and sort of live vicariously through his active subversion of these rules that we are oppressed under. He's like, oh, you have a polite society in which you're not supposed to make bombastically brash claims about well-established things like psychoanalysis, and watch me be the iconoclast and smash each one of those idols that you have, and everyone cheers while I do it.
Right. Well, I mean, isn't the true how do I word this? The true expression of the individual, which is really what being a human being is about, essentially, is expression of the individual, is through rebellion, is through resistance to authority, resistance to consensus, and any kind of system that's put into place that demands a particular behavior or particular art or particular whatever. And that's going back to your science denier. This idea that science is set is one of the most ridiculous things. I mean, science is probably the most creative and individual pursuit, because it's looking
progressive.
Right.
That's the whole point, is that we want to continue to push the candle of knowledge forward, and yet you hear people so confidently assert, I trust the science. And I'm like, I don't even know what the fuck you're talking about.
No, you trust something. And part of that is the this has been going on for a long time, is the institution's insistence that there is only one way to see a particular thing. And
so we're talking about two different things, though, because on the one hand,
I know
about the corruption of the scientific project as it is now, which is absolutely, we don't even need to go there in order to make a statement like trust the science absurd. You can have science done immaculately, perfectly ethically, with no undue influence from the corporate world or any other influence, and it's still a stupid thing to say, because it's not scientific at all. Now, if you want to add that level of corruption, and now you're even more right, because to trust who funded, what science funded by who? Right.
Well, but let's strip away all of that. Like, there's no academics, there's no institutions, there's no this. I think even a group of scientists are going to be rather insistent that what they see is right and what you see is wrong. I mean, that's human nature. Okay. But through the scientific system that we've had, even with the universities, the whatever in place, new things still, like new discoveries, new ways of looking at things, still eventually come forth. They will eventually come forth. There's a lot of resistance to it or whatever. There isn't anybody that sits down and says, no, we're going to censor everybody that says anything different. No, we want you to play the game. We want you to go through the trouble to really force us to look at this. But eventually, if it's right, we'll look at it. And are you familiar with Rupert Sheldrake and his work? Yeah,
totally,
The Science Set Free. I mean, it's such a brilliant book.
I want to come back to that. I'd love to hear more from you on that. But like, I think I just want to bring back Thomas Kuhn, because there's this idea of like, okay, so you're right that like we're looking for some solid ground. That scientists in a vacuum, would actually come to that sort of like, well, that we know for sure, because really, what is science? Looking for certainties, provable, repeatable certainties, and we build on them. Okay, if this is true, then this is true, right? Thomas Kuhn's point is that you get to a point where it builds and builds and builds, and then you realize that it's built on a wrong foundation, and it crumbles down, and you start all over again, knowing what you know from the last time, and on you go. It's like a Tower of Babel. You build it up and tear it down, build it up, tear it down. The problem being is that if you think, oh, no, every step of the way, now we've found some universal, fundamental, irrefutable truth, that's just to miss the point of the history of science, even if there is no corrupting influence, which there always is. But even if theoretically, But
well,
anyway,
yeah, the thing that, and this is my opinion, which could be totally bogus, but
usually
usually is, yeah. That science, essentially, the greatest disservice to the discovery of the mysterious world has been the reductionist idea that science believe it's reduced material reality to its smallest component. And if you get down into quantum science and get down to atomic science, you see that those scientists don't believe that. You're dealing with the quantum idea of potentiality and all of this kind of thing. That does not fit material science. And you hear all the time that the theory of everything is combining material science and quantum science as one science. They can't do that, and they admit to that. So that's the first one, that everything has to reduce down to a material component. And essentially, during that process, one of the primary things that happened, or that was the result of what happened, was this destruction of God. And the destruction of God essentially is the destruction of metaphysics. It's the destruction of anything that is non-material. I mean, you don't have to believe in some guy sitting on a throne up in the clouds. All you have to believe is that what we see and feel with our senses materially is not the whole story. That's a belief in quote unquote God. However you want to formalize that is fine. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, most of it is limiting. It's like, no, I believe in some entity sitting up in heaven. That's a limited view in my view. But the point is that if it's not definable through material definition, therefore it does not exist. It is not part of reality. And I think that's what Sheldrake really goes into quite a bit, is that has been the greatest disservice to science. And if you look at quantum science, you see it. I mean, it's very, very clear. And I mean,
the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing the world that he didn't exist.
Oh, yeah.
Science,
oh, my God.
Science is a religion.
Yeah.
Science is
Scientism.
Fundamentally theological.
Yes.
And I'll tell you why. Because science, give me one miracle and I'll explain everything else.
Yep.
Big Bang. Who made the Big Bang? Well,
yeah. It was always there. Yeah. Right.
It was omnipotent, all existing, all knowing.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's one of my favorite. That's one of my favorite lines is give me one miracle and we'll explain the rest.
Sure.
I mean, that's essentially what that is.
Exactly.
I mean, and there's no other way to describe that, because that is, I mean, a scientist may look at you and go, oh, and get all offended by that comment, but it's like, explain it any other way.
Yeah.
Tell us what it is that started all of this. Well, we don't know yet. It's like promissory materialism is another favorite phrase.
Materialism.
Yeah, it's like
the existentialists, right? Because the existentialists they're not religious or non-religious. They're not spiritual or non-spiritual. They're none of those things. They're about the inquiry in. It's about the question and not the answer.
There you go. Good.
Right? because the fundamental truth is that there is no answer. This is why the existentialists are very weary of anyone with a totalizing system, with a cosmology, right? Give a cosmology to an existentialist or a group of them, and they'll tear it apart if they're sober enough, because like thinking of the French, because they eat, but also because first of all, why would you want a totalizing? Because it has to do the violence that Werner Herzog is talking about, but also like what arrogance that you think that one person could have figured out everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Try.
You know, and going back to Herzog and his comments, there are two things that I find interesting about his presentation. One is that he's so angry about it. Yeah. He's not presenting an idea. He's not even presenting a fact. Like I would present a fact that this is a glass of water, you know, okay. It's like people might believe it's something else, but it's not, it's this. I mean, he doesn't present it that way. He's really angry. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of, you know, just we need to send him onto an island somewhere. He's like pissed. The other is that he puts his criticism all in a scientific paradigm. It's like all from the only thing that he can present as the reason why he feels this way is scientific. It's materialist. It's talking about illuminating every part of the psyche. And, you know, it's all these analogies that are very scientific, materialist, I should say, not scientific.
Yeah. And I think
materialist.
The provocation of the trickster archetype within the human experience is usually based on some frustration, some injustice. Right.
Yeah.
Because for the infantile, you know, human, it's like, oh, I don't like that. I can't really do anything with it, but I can kind of subvert it and I can play with it. Like, you know, you have the power over me to tell me to go to bed, but I can hide in the closet when you tell me to do it. Right.
Yeah.
So as much as he's motivated, yes, I'm sure by anger, and we can, you know, give him the middle finger by psychoanalyzing him for why he's doing that. I think on a deeper level, sorry, Werner, it's just, this is archetypal possession.
Yeah,
he has this capacity to allow Trickster to take over him, and when Trickster takes over, Trickster goes, here, let me fuck with you by giving you this very sort of angrily certain, you know, critique of the thing that you hold certain, while actually did it because I'm using the scientific purview to sort of do it. He says it's a disease.
Yeah,
he pathologizes the pathologizers.
Right,
Trickster
right. And you know, the thing about it, I mean, he's definitely, no question, he is a brilliant artist.
Oh my God.
Okay. So he's accessing this totally non-material, totally metaphysical, whatever thing. So it's like you can just look at somebody like that, I don't give a fuck what you say. You know, it's like I want to see your art. I want to see your expression. That's where you are. I don't care what you think about psychoanalysis. It doesn't mean anything, really. And of course, that's the last thing he wants. He wants people to go, oh yeah, I agree. You know, let's send all these people to some island in the South Pacific. But it's ironic that he wants so much to concretize something, to put something in this form that there's no argument against, you know, which is the last thing an artist does in reality, but it's one of the most common traits you see in artists. You know, you look at somebody like Beethoven, and it's like he was like absolutely 100% certain about what he was doing and what his music was and what it meant to him and whatever. It's like that's what you're supposed to get from this. And I don't know if I've ever met any artist that wasn't completely committed to their abstract presentation. Have you ever met an artist that looks at their painting and go, well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there's certainly artists that don't like what they do, you know, because that's once you concretize something, it's no longer up here floating all around in your head, you know.
I'm thinking of the director of this, like a script that she's written, and don't fucking play with my lines. You'll read the lines as I've written them.
Sure.
Yeah. There's that. I mean, I think also you do hear a lot of, you think of artists like Jean-Michel Basquiat and the kind of attitude that he would have had toward his art. You know, people would love to kind of like, you know, make it something more than it's not. And he looks at them and kind of giggles and goes, I don't know, man, I just fucking threw the paint on the thing, you know.
Well, but that's I'm not really being, I didn't articulate that really well, but you're right. I mean, it's also, I think once art is concretized, once it's put into material form, like once a painter paints a painting or once a musician puts notes down or whatever, then it becomes inadequate.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to recreate something you can't create. You can't put in material form. And that's why you have artists that are like, you know, these artists that create things that are constantly changing or moving, you know, like landscape art or, you know, whatever, because there's a element of that is never concretized. It's always moving.
The context too is interesting. You know, I'm thinking about, this is him at a press conference probably at a film festival. I've been to many film festivals, and there's this kind of unspoken thing where whenever there's a screening where the director, producer is present, there's always going to be one prick in the background who's going to shoot up his hand and shoot off his mouth about some fucking thing. Oh, in that frame you did this, and didn't you mean that by this?
Yeah, right.
And there's this kind of long-standing tradition. It's kind of like a heckler in a comedy show where the wise ass, you know, trickstery, you know, director is going to basically tell them to shut the fuck up and did you watch the movie, you know, like shut up and watch the movie. And there's a violence to it, I think, because what a lot of artists hold precious is your capacity to just to pull all of that shit out of the way, right? Yeah, like we call it space holding in psychospiritual space. Pull all that side, let that all pull to one side, and just be with the work as it is, and allow yourself to be moved. Because the minute that you start analyzing and breaking down, you're no longer allowing this piece to move you. And that's really what they understand to be the strongest force behind the work, is that you stand in front of it and go, fuck. Oh.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I got a great little story with that. When I first met Cindy, my present wife, she's not, I mean, she loves music, but she's not the kind of music person that I grew up being. You know, I'm a composer. I listen to a lot of avant-garde, really strange music and whatever. And I took her to some concert, which was very modern. I can't remember who the composer was, but it was somebody like Webern or something, you know, some 12-tone Schoenberg or whatnot. And she hated it. And she hated it so much that she had to leave. She had to leave the concert hall because she hated it so much. It was driving her nuts. It made her angry. And I remember telling my composition teacher this. I was like, because I was like going, what am I supposed to do? You know, I'm married to somebody that hates this stuff. And he goes, that's great. She had an emotional response to it.
Totally.
The music did what it's supposed to do. And that's much better than if she just sat there and fell asleep listening.
Let herself be moved.
It's right. It's exactly what you just said. I think that's fascinating.
Well, I was struggling with that with this film that came out recently, The Substance. I went to go and see that with my partner, and about 45 minutes to an hour in, she's clutching my arm, being like, fucking. And I'm like, you know, I'm a long time student of cinema and cinema, right? So I'm like, oh, this is getting interesting now. Like, let's go. We're getting into real cinematic territory if people are fucking squirming in their seats. Anyway, 10 minutes later, I'm the one saying to her, you know what? I never say this about film, but fuck this movie. I fucking hate it. It's a violent, there's no redeeming qualities. I just feel like, fuck off, you stupid, awful movie.
Right.
And I walked out of the movie. I'm like, whoa, I've never had a reaction like that. I always have this capacity to appreciate something. And then later I'm kind of like, I look back on that and I laugh. I'm like, boy, that movie got me, man. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. It did. Provoked me into hating it because it just it just ratcheted up.
Yeah, it's the same story. Yeah, no,
I hate that movie. Yes, but I also now have appreciative kind of consciousness for the fact that it really did. I did not. You know what the worst case scenario is? You walk out of a movie and you go,
right.
That okay,
right.
Maybe it's better than standing outside in the cold for 2 hours. You know?
Right. It's technically bad. There are things that weren't done well, and you don't get all emotional about it. You just go, that sucks. Yeah. That's totally different.
For the record, don't go and see The Substance, especially not in a cinema. Spare yourself, please. It's fucking awful. Awful.
Everybody's going to have to go. You know, I had that reaction.
Really, that's my trickster me is like,
I know. There you go. You sound like Herzog. Yeah. The first time I saw Eyes Wide Shut, I hated it. I hated it. and I watched it through and I said, this movie doesn't make any sense. It's stupid. Then somebody explained it to me. I mean, just very, very, simple explanation. And I went back and watched it again and I thought it was brilliant. It's like, I maybe it is.
I never lose a movie because of the plot, because I don't follow the plot anyway. I'm dyslexic, so good luck. I don't spoiler alerts, don't do anything for me. I literally just sit there and soak it in. So I don't need to understand anything that's going on. I mean, I remember the first time I saw that, just like being in the theater with the canes coming down when they're in ritual. Even I remember still in that cinema hearing the name Nick Nightingale. And I was just like, whoa, it went through me like a shiver, like just that name.
Wow.
And you know that's played by Todd Field, the director.
No, I don't.
And I had seen In the Bedroom, which was directed by Todd Field. I think maybe that's an anachronism. Or I saw another film of his. And so I knew him. I'd seen him, in an interview. And there was something about that too. It's like there's something about, oh my God, I know that guy. Oh, but he's playing this character. Anyway, I'm right. But I love that movie. And I don't even know what it's about. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of movies like that you can't really put your finger on what it is that it's supposed to be, but it still has great impact.
Did Oliver Stone make it to Epstein Island, do you think? Is that where he got the fodder for this stuff? Do you think he was ever...
Who?
Oliver Stone, the director.
Of what?
Was he ever was he known to be a guest on Epstein Island? Because
I don't know.
Because this is kind of right. This is what you suspect is going on at Epstein Island. Some kind of shit like he's depicting, right?
Oh, right. Yes. You're talking about Eyes Wide Shut. Why Oliver Stone? Where did he?
Oh, sorry. That's the wrong director.
It's Kubrick. Directed Eyes Wide Shut. All right. Sorry, I just got confused for a second.
I'm thinking conspiracy. That's why my brain went to conspiracy.
Well, why not? I mean, I mean that's a whole nother conversation.
Oh yeah, I know.
Epstein's Island and all that shit. But I
wonder, was Kubrick ever? Is he one of Jeffrey's guests back in the day? You think?
I don't know. Could have been. I don't know. Yeah.
I'm also assuming that's what you mean by someone explained to me what that film meant.
Yes, it was about the elite, the upper, this whole thing that's going on about, and if anybody knew anything about it, there's a whole bunch of stories about Eyes Wide Shut, like that they had to recut it. They had to change it because it was getting too close to the truth or something. I don't know. There's a bunch of, I mean, that could all be bullshit too. I don't know, but Kubrick's like, I mean, he's in that whole world, that whole conspiracy world, because he's the one that's supposed to supposedly shot the moon landing films and all of that. Like, why would they pick him, to do that? But
isn't the
of all people
thing, there's like really sort of sober-minded people who don't normally go in for conspiracy theorists will hear facts on the moon landing thing and really kind of go, huh. Right?
Oh yeah. Oh, big time.
There's some weird shit.
There's a lot of weird shit. And when you look at it politically, the whole idea that it didn't happen makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, but they did go. How many times did they go? They went 5 times. So it's like they would have had to have faked it 5 times. So anyway. But that's another topic as well.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I wish we had pulled up another clip to show of Werner Herzog. We would probably talk for another hour, but there's this great clip that you can find on YouTube where he's talking about, I think it's in The Burden of Dreams, the documentary on the making of Fitzcarraldo. Yeah. And they ask him something about, he's talking about something about like the harmony of nature. And he goes on this unbelievably putrid and beautiful rant about how like nature isn't beautiful. It's full of like nihilism. I don't hear song in the birds. They're screeching in torment. It's chef's kiss. Beautiful Werner Herzog.
Wow.
Maybe we'll put it. I mean, we can add it as a kind of link or something. But go and check that out if you liked this clip. If he lit you up with his tricksterism and his taboo and his brash kind of arrogance, you'll love that one.
Now, before we finish, I did want to ask you this. This is kind of a academic question, but how do you feel? When you first played this for me, I think our comment back and forth was like, I think I said, what do you think of that? And you said, well, I'm kind of, on the fence with it, with this idea. And I am too. Say the same thing. So what do you think you do in your work with clients
Mm-hmm.
that avoids the pitfall that Herzog describes here? How do you think you avoid this idea that you're illuminating everything and that you're a disease and you're doing everything that is negative as a therapist? How do you think you do that?
I mean, I don't think that we're ever not. I'm never really in too much danger of violently overanalyzing things in such an accurate way that it's sort of traumatizing in the way that a heavy dose of psychedelics when you're not prepared could flood you with material that you can't integrate. I just don't think that me or anyone else is capable of that. But no, I would say one of the things that we do is work consent forward. And interestingly, I had a conversation about this earlier today. A client who I would have, or colleague who I would have imagined would know exactly what I meant, had no clue. Here's a way. A client's sharing something, and you, as the therapist, as the counselor, is bearing witness. And suddenly, it occurs to you that okay, so I don't know what's being asked of me here. Right. So one of the check-ins would be this: is this a listening problem, or is this a reflecting problem, or an analyzing problem? Are you looking to find a solution to this, or do you need me to bear witness? Do you need me to validate your choices in this? Do you want me to challenge you on your choices? And then the client will take a minute and they'll be like, no, I just need you to hear me. Okay, I'm listening. And then they're speaking, and I'll say, do you want me to reflect back what I heard? And then I'll just tell them what I think I heard, and we'll kind of clear it up. And I'll say, how do you feel? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? There's no reason. Now, that being said, some people are like, no, analyze it, please, tear it apart, break it. I want to get into the guts of this thing and really figure out what are the strings behind this here, and what's the hand over the string, right? And then so then we break things apart, we speculate, we question, we draw connections, we check in with the body. Does it feel right? Does it track with your story of your past? And then again, we continue to say, does it feel right? Are we headed in the right direction? Does this feel like what you need in order to get the place that you're looking to go? Right.
Well, like we said right at the very start, I think one of the biggest problems with his statements is that what he claims can happen and it's detrimental, illuminating is impossible. I don't think that's possible to do, no matter what you do as a therapist. I think the psyche, as it operates, as it filters, as it protects, as it does any of the things that it does naturally, is going to keep that from happening. I think there's a sacred mystery in the psyche that there is no way for anybody to get to it to the point where it damages you. Absolutely. All right. It's only the things that are essentially aberrant. They're things that what we could call complexes. They're things that are in the psyche that are already known by the psyche to be something it wants to remove or wants to illuminate or whatever. And those are the only things that you can get to, or that the client can get to. I mean, we don't even get to it. And I think this is one reason why both Freud and Jung gave up hypnosis and hypnotherapy in their work, because I think they felt they were more likely to damage something by bypassing the basic ego protection. 100%. Yeah. And they didn't do it every time. They wouldn't necessarily damage somebody every single time. But if they could illuminate something that should not be illuminated,
this is why it's very dangerous to pair up psychedelics and therapeutic interventions.
Oh, okay.
Because under the influence of psychedelics, if you have a shrewd and maybe not so, to use Werner Herzog's terms, discreet practitioner, they might actually be able to bypass protectors, but then there's blowback. And we know that in parts work, we know that in trauma work, that there's always this kind of, we have to trust the gatekeepers.
Yeah, we do. And I don't think we have to, unless we have a chemical intervention or a hypnotic intervention. And even hypnotic intervention probably isn't that open. Okay, because I've done a lot of past life work when people are in trance. And there's a lot of places you can't go. And there's still that protector there to some degree, even in hypnosis. But they discovered that, and I think it's a good thing. You don't pull things out of people unless they're willing to give them. So I don't think it's possible to, in psychoanalysis, certainly without hypnosis and without chemical intervention, I don't think it's possible to do what Herzog is claiming. And
I think it's possible for a poorly trained medical model, like sort of psychoanalytical based person to do more damage than good. And I'll give you.
I agree with that.
I get people who come to me who are traumatized by going to a psychiatrist, a psychologist, who gets broken down into bits and analyzed and told take this pill, and they feel very unheard. They don't feel normalized.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
And they gave me a diagnosis and go out the door. That would be the place where I would say yes. But this idea of total illumination,
that's what I'm
exactly.
That's really what I'm commenting on. I mean, you can definitely be fucked up by a bad therapist. I mean, there's no question about that. But not to the extent, not the worry he has that he describes. Yeah. I don't think it's possible to have happen.
So the reason that I, really don't work within the parameters of the controlled active psychotherapy is because I actually find that there's a lot more outside of that purview, in particularly in working existentially and shamanically. And the two things about those approaches that I like the most is that they are both focused on not solutions and answers and understanding, but better questions. Right. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, if you think of like what is the efficacy of long-term psychodynamic therapeutic approaches, is not that the approach did anything to alleviate the tension in the psyche, but that you learned how to do that for yourself.
Right.
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 And that is all based on better questions. I always tell my clients this: if you leave my office more confused than you came in, it's a success.
That's right.
If you come out with better questions, that's the better question to be asking. I was asking the wrong question.
Yeah.
This is why this whole, with the CRPO, they want you to get the presenting complaint. And I'm like, why? The presenting complaint's always like some kind of joke, right?
Well, yeah.
I've never, ever worked with a client whose presenting issue was what they were there really to work on.
Oh, no, same here. Yeah. And if their presenting issue is something, it's not psychological. Like if they come in and say, I've got a really shitty job that I hate or whatever, and that's my presenting complaint. It's like, well, then change your job. It's like, then there may be a psychological element to that. I'm not saying there never is, but yeah.
Well, manualized therapies are insistent upon co-creating goals and then checking in that you've achieved them. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh man, the ego loves that shit.
Yeah. Right.
Give me a goal that you're going to force me to hit, and I will bury every neurosis that I don't want looked at, behind that one.
Right. Yeah. Right. Okay, we're going to wrap it up. If you're ready to go, and thank you everybody for listening. Please make comments please subscribe. Because we want to keep doing this, and if you like it, we want to hear. If you don't like it, we want to hear that too. And if you have any ideas about stuff we could talk about, just write to us or leave a comment here, and we'll do what we can.
Correct us if we're wrong. I mean, half the time I talk out of my ass, so I probably said like the Oliver Stone thing. If you catch me in this kind of thing, it wasn't Oliver Stone. It was.
Oh yeah.
Comments below, please.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Same here, because I'm probably inaccurate with.
But you know what, because knowing that there are people out there that will keep me in check in some kind of polite and civil way, it means that I can continue to just talk out of my ass and not worry too much, because you're spreading disinformation.
That's right. Well, we figure it out.
Right, hopefully.
Thank you, William. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.